everybody, this is the Wikstrand. So the movie of today is Enemy at the Gates. So what happens when you give Sean Shakano, who has done, such movies as The Red Name of the Rose and 7 Years in Tibet, this enormous amount of money, a bunch of really good actors, and the Battle of Stalingrad to tackle? He's going to give you a good war picture. He's not going to give you a fantastic war picture, unfortunately. They hamstrung themselves and they killed their own momentum by doing one thing that we're gonna get into that I thought was not as good as it could have been. But I think that by and large, this was exactly what I wanted most of the time. But there were a couple of things that gradually dampened my enthusiasm of this movie a little bit. I like war picture. I love movies about the Second World War, and I've been aching for a good Stalingrad movie since the movie Stalingrad came out in the mid-90s, and we'll get to that in a second, why that movie is the superior movie to this one, despite being made for, no amount of money compared to this one. This movie is not hurt at all by the fact that it takes a lot of liberties with the actual history, because they were out to do a good story, not a, documentary about the whole thing. But how good is this movie? What's good, what's bad, and why couldn't they have had, Russian actors and German actors speaking their native tongues? It could have been so much more authentic than it would have been. But anyway, this is Enemy at the Gates. The Battle of Stalingrad is one of the biggest battles during World War II. This was the time where the tide really turned for the Germans and marked the beginning of the end for them. This was not the beginning of the end like El Alamein was, or as Churchill said, it's merely the end of the beginning. This was proper beginning of the end, because the Germans were very soundly defeated in Stalingrad. Now, the reason why they wanted to take Stalingrad is normally attributed to the fact that they wanted to reach the oil field down at the Caspian Sea and stuff like that, and they needed apparently to take Stalingrad for this matter. But I have always maintained that I think that it was merely because it was named Stalingrad, named after, Hitler's antagonist, and that's why he was very adamant that they would take this city. Now, how do you depict the Battle of Stalingrad? Now, in the beginning, they do everything correct. I loved it so much. The spectacle of the battle was fantastic. It was so impressive. The planes and the boats and people getting shot, and the Russians were, didn't have enough rifles, so you would run beside the guy who had the rifle, and then he would shoot, and you would pick up the rifle, and then you would, continue the charge. And they were just, killing them like flies. It was fucking amazing, and it was shot in a way that made it both feel like you were there, but it didn't have this shaky cam nonsense that I really didn't like from Saving Private Ryan. So far, so fantastic. Our main character is, however, Vasily Zaitsev, played by Jude Law. He is a sharpshooter and a sniper that strikes up a relationship with political commissary Danilov, played by Joseph Fiennes, who uses his expert marksmanship, for propaganda sakes, and he sort of becomes a symbol of Russian resistance against the Nazis. So the Nazis, they get a little pissed about, this guy is so effective of killing their officers and stuff like that. So they sent in a sharpshooter of their own, Major Koenig, played by Ed Harris. So they now play a kind of a cat and mouse chase with each other inside of the Battle of Stalingrad. That is the problem with this movie. I love the idea of, having him being a part of the battle, but when this becomes a very quiet and not as suspenseful as they think it is, standoff between them when they're trying to outsmart each other, outflank each other, it becomes more of a chess game. that could have worked in another context than the fucking Battle of Stalingrad. This did not kill the movie, not at all. I still like the characters, I still like the actors in this movie. I still thought that the production was fantastic and that the war sequences looked fantastic. But it devalued this movie from a fantastic movie to a good movie. And we did not get any idea of what the battle was like in Stalingrad outside of this, because it focuses too much on it. It could have been an integral part of the story, but I would have been more happy to have more of, you know, the dilemma that they were having, and, you know, killing of innocents and the civilians and their sufferings and stuff like that. Having Jude Law and Ed Harris shooting at each other in, you know, tight corners, stuff like that, was fun for about 2 minutes, and then I got a little bored by it. I was much more interested in the propaganda things. I was also a little peeved by the fact that Bob Hoskins was kind of sidelined in this movie. He's played Nikita Khrushchev, who has some very, very cool moments, but he probably wasn't there, and he doesn't really add that much to the story. But hey ho, what you gonna do? You're gonna have to get Bob Hoskins in here somewhere. Rachel Weisz plays Tanya, and they have sort of a little love triangle sort of between her and the commissary and Zaitsev. One of the benefits of the Red Army during World War II was the fact that they did have a lot of female soldiers. And the fact was that you could then have female soldiers interact with the whole thing without it being felt like you were, you know, pushing in female characters just for the sake of having a female characters without having anything, you know, useful to do. So I like that bit a lot. And her chemistry with Jude Law was very good, and I really liked her character. Plus, she's probably one of the best actresses of all time, so that helped a lot. The thing is, I didn't feel that this movie really got a good representation of what the Battle of Stalingrad was all about. If you want that, I would advise you to see the fantastic German movie Stalingrad that came out, I think it was 1993. It was a very, very authentic representation of what it was really like to be in that situation, and it felt like you knew what the battle, you know, was about and what happened and stuff like that. In Enemy at the Gates, stuff just happens and you have no feeling for what is going on the battlefield as a whole. You're just having this thing with Ed Harris and Jude Law running around trying to kill each other, and I was kind of, I've seen that now. And man, if they could have had this enormous budget for Stalingrad, you would have gotten a fan-fucking-tastic movie. Should you see Enemy at the Gate? The short answer is yes, because it is a good war picture. It is an impressive movie. It is not as suspenseful as it thinks it is. It is not quite as gruesome and impressive as it thinks it is, but it is almost that, because part of it is so fantastic, but lots of it is just a little bit too much of this cat and mouse chase that isn't as fun or as memorable or as suspenseful as they think it is. But it is a good movie. I just wished it could have been a little better, because it was almost there, because the production value is so good and it is so well directed, but they kind of dropped the ball with the idea of the story for this movie. They should have just focused on the battle and allow Zaitsev to be a major player in it. Maybe they should have had the commissary as the main character, now that I think about it. The more I think about it, that probably makes the most sense. Enemy at the Gates is a very well-made war picture. I give this movie 63 points. There are aspects of this movie that is fantastic, and the movie is never quite boring, even though a couple of the sequences with you know, our two major snipers fighting each other was going on for too long and was a little bit, why didn't he do that? That's stupid. With that said, this movie never overstayed its welcome. It wasn't too long, it wasn't too tedious, and it didn't overcomplicate things too much, even though a couple of sequences was a little bit, well, why does this happen? Why does that happen? But for the most part, I was entertained by the whole thing, even though you should probably not be generally entertained by the Battle of Stalingrad, but I was, because it was a very well-made movie, and I just wished it could have been a little better. So I'll see you next time for, well, so-and-so reviewing, well, such and such. Thank you for watching. Thank you very much.